One of the most rewarding aspects of this reading series is that right along with the students, I get to spend time with poets that I don't already know. So this year has involved 3 visiting poets, and I had never met any of them before they came to campus. And that's been really exciting for me, and that's true of today's poet as well. I'm grateful for Katie Manning and Ada Limon, and especially tonight, Genevieve Kaplan, for joining us and sharing their poetry with Chapman University. I'm especially proud that Tabula Poetica continues to bring together a variety of aesthetics and an amalgam of poets at different stages of their career. That's 2 guiding principles informing each series in the fall, that we present a wide array of aesthetics and also that we tap poets at different stages of their careers. Today, that's Genevieve Kaplan, and she's going to add her voice and her perspective to the mix that is Tabula Poetica. Genevieve Kaplan holds an MFA from the University of Iowa and a PhD from USC just down the road. She now coordinates the Kingsley and Kate Tufts Poetry Award. In that role, she generously donated a stash of poetry books to Leatherby Libraries here at Chapman University, and that strengthens our wide and eclectic collection and demonstrates the sort of literary citizenship that fosters reading and that I think Genevieve believes so firmly in. Genevieve Kaplan's book, In the Ice House, is available for sale right over here, so after the reading, grab a copy of this. This In the Ice House won the A Room of Her Own's Foundation to the Lighthouse Publication Prize from Redhead Press. That's a mouthful. And she has also published 3 chapbooks, including Travelogue, which was published last year by Dancing Girl Press. In this book, In the Ice House, many of the poems are spare and flitting. Images are caught for an instant. The poem is a brief unblurring of the world around us. We mouth the words even as the view is changing. We can hear the quick, unexpected echo and the cadence of momentary beauty. Genevieve Kaplan also edits the Toad Press chapbook series that focuses on translation. I think she talked with Victoria Chang's poetry students about that a little bit. Of that work, she writes, as the act of translation offers a series of possibilities, so too does distilling that new literature into a material chapbook form. As publishers, let us aim to choose the most exciting, the most effortless seeming, the most inevitable, the most ordinary, the most wonderful presentations of text. That resonates with the thinking that fuels Tabula Poetica here and our international journal Tab, and we're thrilled to have a kindred spirit among us today. Please welcome Genevieve Kaplan.
Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm so happy that I got to spend so much time with you all. I'm really appreciative of you all who are in this room right now to listen to poetry. I appreciate it. As a poet, let me tell you, people don't always listen to me, so it's wonderful to see you here. And I'm especially appreciative of all the people who have spent so much time with me already today. I was interviewed for the podcast, I visited a class, I did a talk over in the Interfaith Center. So it's so nice to, I think, feel taken seriously as a human, not just as a poet, but like as a human, and be on campus and get to visit with you all. So it's so generous of you all to have me here. Thank you so much in advance, I suppose, for your attention tonight. So I'm going to read a few things. I thought I would start with some poems from In the Ice House, because I know a lot of you, or some of you have read it. I see some books on your laps, which makes me really happy. So I'll start with some poems from there, and then I'm going to read some poems from one of my chapbooks, so some more recent work, and then a few poems that are sort of a little bit more like in progress, so you'll get to hear some very much more recent stuff as well. So, In the Ice House, I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, which is titled Epigraph. And I like to start with this poem at readings because I feel like it kind of functions like a traditional epigraph. So you know what an epigraph is, it's usually a quote by somebody else that precedes the book and sort of lets the reader know like what the mood is or how you might begin to read that text. So I feel like this poem kind of functions like that for my book, except the difference is that I wrote it myself. So I wrote my own epigraph. Epigraph. 1. Cruelty in the New West, like cruelty in the Old, begins at home, with the misuse of light bulbs, wedding rings, microwaves. There's no telling. County lines shift over time, but we're not so fragile. Quaint enough, we're allowed to be a part of it. Facing the musty window, fingerprints, creases, barbarism. How many miss it? 2. The mirror in my mouth, I hope, won't betray a thing. 3. There's a danger in beauty, a net in the sea, a kite in the sky, a bird in a tree. Curiosity is one wonder, thunder another. And the sky gray, and the sky green, and the leaves flattened by the rain. The tree's limbs wilted by the water seeping down, and the sky green, and the sky hitched to night, and the sky battered with its own leaves to bruising. And the night long, and the night shifting, and the night green. I have an urgency tossed around like the branches in the night, on a branch in the dusk near another tree, on a limb, on a twig in the rain, on the leaves in the dirt near the rocks lying near. The flash in the night despite the gestures of the branches. Standing water, full trees, rushing river. It is dark, it is dark, it is dark in the night. It's nice that it's actually like a little bit chilly out and it's dark out right now, so often when I read these poems in Los Angeles, I'm just like, it's so wrong. It's like 90 degrees and I'm sweating and I'm reading about ice and anyway, so it's nice that it's almost winter. We're almost feeling like winter. The next poem I'm going to read is titled The Ice Storm. So this book is made up of, some of you know already, a few series of poems that all have the same title. So they're really short little things about like between yay and yay in terms of size. But so I'm going to read through the poems that have the title The Ice Storm. So they're sort of like discrete units, but they also function as a series. So what I'm going to do for you now is I'm going to read through, not the entire series, but many of them. And so I'm not going to read the title every time because you know it's The Ice Storm. Okay? So you'll know when it's a new poem because I'll turn the page and then you'll know. Okay? The Ice Storm. Begins on Thursday, lasts through Sunday, is beautiful. Makes each leaf, each pattern, lonely and glass. Under the ice hill, the valley waits. Inside the glass, a pressed leaf. Like counting to zero. Once again, falling down in the street. The hope of foolishness. The ice is a brilliant design. The fingers of it, the toes, the spines of the sky, spine pressed to ice, feet out, and only one has fallen. A bird calls down from its nest. Its blue wing cocked. The cold snap bites back, ruins the roses, dangling all over the place. The water drains quickly, then slowly, with no place for melt to go. How jarring it could be. Light thickens and descends, adrift along the river, a lace curtain and a black window. Never asked a shadow, watched what could happen by groaning, a quiet beat for reason, best for the storm seeds growing. At first, the way the sky looked was shaken, ashen. At the window, the sky crumbles. The brilliance could not have mattered. Who cares where the breeze lies at last? The fog will blow in at just the right instant. The roads are wet, the plains are dry. It must not overflow. We're on the planet again, alone. Okay, this is a longer one. The bird noises that do not acknowledge us talking. The bird noises that do not acknowledge us talking come up from behind. A bird halo around my head, a bird wreath that will not quiet. The trucks arrive, the traffic passes, a day of unceasing wind, a blowing that's cause for rot. The birds on their lines attend, an evening of wrestling, the chairs, my skirts, an ill-bought umbrella, the tree in the way of the view, fascination with realism, human behavior under glass. If anyone dares to go out, it is you, the fantastic one, a glowing system to be admired. Nothing is dangerous. The minute that we stop here is only very brief. I warn you to be prepared in case things change. The attack on the mountain did not go as well as planned. I could not sleep in the dark, so kept out of small spaces. No matter what I imagine, to wear one's hair over the left ear, to veer slightly to the curb when walking, nothing is dangerous. The fools may as well go home. I could detect a spider in the corner if I looked, at least a web, at least the beginnings of some disaster. That always gives me just like a little bit of chills when I'm reading, because it's so flat and cold and weird. So maybe you got them too, I don't know. So I'm going to read also from my recent chapbook in an aviary. So these are poems that I will tell you a little bit more about them as I go on, but these are poems that I think in some ways I wrote because I was responding to having done all these readings for In the Ice House, where I was reading all these like very short, terse, kind of depressing things. And so I started a new project where I was writing poems and trying to get some more movement in them, and some more like color, and some more things, and some more objects, and some more me, and some people, and that kind of thing. So this is from a series of poems that I wrote in some of the botanic gardens around Los Angeles. So I would actually go out into the gardens. So I went to like Huntington, the LA Botanical Garden, the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, which is kind of close to my house, and a few other places. So I would go out into these spaces and actually try to write while I was there. So I was writing in public, which was different, but also trying to write to like get the poem, to get some of those bits of the garden space, of the movement of that in there. The Great Strong Name. Under the tallest tree, inside the largest forest, with a halo of nets in the clearing, from the path, from the stand, our surrounds around us. Despite what we read, the fences, the beautiful shade, the cracks wide enough to squeeze through, the ever-widening holes, we could gaze there forever. We'll benefit from some time away, perhaps, drinking in the green and brown, so nothing would be stronger than, broader than, the selection of trees we see here. No pity, no passing without looking up, no silence from the stream, and the movement in the trees, the rustle in the ground, picking up the nails, the strewn things. And so I would begin to disappear. The angles lit up, and the fence poles, arms, abutting our very sight. What we've determined is common ground. In the place we've sent ourselves to grow a little older in, to peer from, the waiting room, abounding with gnats, the flip of the moth and the mosquito. Forgot to be shameful, forgot to hide, since we see through to sky, all here together, tree, they could see us. Shift up and down the wires that close them in. Which is the hedge, which is not the fence, which is where we walk, which is where we must stay out. That which is the wind, that which fades. The tree and arch of the sky to the sky, as leaves fall, as branches crack the wind, and down, and a small tail showing through the tall grass, because there's a joke, there's a man, in the jungle green, the jungle brown, the muddle yellow. The leaves are loud, and someone is always speaking up from behind, the depression in the ground, seated in this place. Which green was what I heard out in the yard, the fracture of a branch or step, small movement of the night, glancing toward the laundromat, the cartridge, electric types of noises through the foliage, and someone coming closer, some movement not so distant. As the order is the thing, the archiving of the thing, the crickets and their pledges in the lost circle of black waiting. Jungle there at the shape of it, for the shape near the trunk and the dirt of it, seemingly lost or broken fast, to be unrecognizable. The main thing is to take the time, not near enough of a breeze or a tree motion, the night which shadows on and lingers on. So as I was writing these, I was thinking about not only trying to sort of recreate that garden space or the experience of sitting in the garden as part of the poems, but I was also thinking about the garden, these like sort of built gardens as weird places that are constructed but supposed to be native, or like they're recreating how it would have been in the oak forest or something like that. So I also started thinking about the fact that these are like walled off spaces, that these are fenced spaces, that they have access to certain people, that we have to pay to get in them, those types of things. So I feel like these themes also sort of found their way into my poems. They are so lovely, and they cannot get out. Similarly, the light fades, thickens, and the moon twice as big. If there are bars, if the key is lost, the sky is not affected. This, a world where women watch women, there are cages, creatures. As a last night, a final evening, or dusk in the midst of all fortune, rings shining there, dressed improperly, after all, in unserious shoes, before the park closes, we're no longer welcome. I pretend to pass along, to gather slowly, to walk the parking lot toward my own, watching. Similarly, the bed creaks, the trees blossom, the radishes twice their size. Of their skill to begin, women and their children, a rake and a hoe, loose rattlings of the daylight, an afternoon in spades. The bird turns on its own, the ground beneath is moving, subtle ways the shade extends, the minimum of a human being, the smallest gesture of nature, inverted in springtime, the wet drops, the hose that goes on, the house butted up to a buzzing garden. What shade of blue, which brown, how to get outside enough to see myself looking in. So one of the things that happened also while I was writing this poem is I came across, I was reading a book by Nina Lloyd that I think was a very certain book, because she has this poem that's a prose poem that I don't think she wrote. I think her editor cobbled together these weird things. So I found this prose poem that's called Ladies in an Aviary, and it's a poem about sort of like women posing as birds and a man coming in to feed them, and so they're like being observed, and it's very awkward and it's very weird. So this was also something that was kind of informing my poems that I was writing in the gardens, because I sort of had this in the back of my head as well. And so I'm also using a little bit of her language, or her editor's language, I don't really know. I'm using some of the language from the poem in some of my poems as well. So when you hear some repetitions, those are her lines. What would you like us to be? Lovers, children, tall birds claiming the uppermost branches, the bounty littering the ground. Where would you like us to go? How would you like us to attend? Call to ease, a shadow pushing through the blossoms, imagining the path, charming, cheerful, not hanging much on the details. The bird uses its beak to disconnect the flower, the petals flung from the tree, whole blooms of them tossing pink to the ground. Nothing has gotten more beautiful, unless it's a secret entrance, exit. So thinking about, I think, Mina Loy's prose poem, and then also the act of writing in public and being in public, which is something that I am not really that comfortable with doing. Definitely not like writing poetry in public. It's a very weird thing. So I also ended up thinking about really like me as a person being observed in these weird enclosed spaces, and in some ways not being able to leave because I wanted to finish writing the poem. So this is also something that like kept coming up. So these like themes of enclosure, of entrapment. I think also being a woman and being looked at, or being aware of being looked at as a woman versus like as a writer, sitting there. So, ladies vary. They are so lovely, and they cannot get out. They are lovely, yet they cannot get out. They are so lovely, so they cannot get out. So they are lovely, but they cannot get out. They are so lovely, for they cannot get out. But they are so lovely, they cannot get out. So they are so lovely, so they cannot get out. They are lovely, or they cannot get out. They are so lovely, and they cannot get out. A tremor of ribbon. The creek brushing past, or the rocks that surround it, the path wavering up the low hill, dotted, strewn, bent with dry leaves in the slight wind that comes to turn the trees, lean them down. The bench, the spinning leaf, the wandering hair, the shudder from above against the click of the mechanical, the chains strung up together, married like people do. The letters to reveal us, each lift in the rock, a purposeful, faceless opening. The net under the grass to catch us if we shift about, empty stream bed, useless container, rainwater collector. As the voice moves along the path, stop and sway, pause and look, point on a favorite, so unapologetic. Rhododendron, the type of shout that travels, the poem that stabs, that pauses to pose in silhouette and bounds forward. Body like a bending river, body is a short-haired animal and uncomfortable in being so observed. Okay, this next one it's called A Flutter of Modest Aspiration. And for those of you who were at my talk earlier, where I was showing you some of the woven broadside poems that I was working on, this is one that I wove. Okay, so you can listen to it and picture that strange thing that I showed you. A flutter of modest aspiration. As I thought I could pick it up, thought I could pick some up, watched the birds hop through the wide wire of the fence happily, like it was nothing, to watch the weeds grow in their rows, feel the stalks thicken, the calls over the next fence, childish coos, the parking lot separating us, the squirrel there, the children in a line, the bird posing with its feet on the wire, the sun happily, as if to own a word, as if to live off the land. As if to shake it down, reach in through the bent wires and ease of a leaf, adjust a stem of a vegetable, to be seen from the porch across the way, to hear the voices carry through, angry, through, as if I could pick them up, as if I had brought my gloves. If the key opened the other door, if the pile of dead leaves was more than for mulch, and sending messages into the upper air and waiting for them to drift back down. Because that's the morning and the afternoon of it, the memorization of that cut sea, the memorial of that day, the grass dug up, the site fenced off but unprotected, that similar duty of my hands, my feet, the same sea I wandered through, the same lot. And I wouldn't know what to teach them, and I wouldn't be able to want to be seen, and I'd reach for the bird to tell it, wait, I dreamt it for you. And I'm going to read a few newer ones. So one of the questions that I got after my talk earlier about the woven poems and taking the poems off the page and the acts of sewing that I was working on was about how that had found its way into my other writing. And so recently I found out that I've been working on this sewing project for some time, that I've started kind of writing about sewing and material and thinking about words as material. So I thought I'd read you a couple poems that are sort of that I think embody that in some way. I don't know if they're necessarily about sewing, but they sort of are. So you'll see some of you'll hear some of the sewing images in there. This first one is called The Material. For the material of the word, we gather images, sticks, sheep, color, sewn. In fending off the other, we think deliberately, identifying the landscape where each word lives, noting names of words that drag us down. The application of one feeds off another. Spool equals stray, weight equals weave, distress equals watch this. Your other sense of watching. The forever quiet luster of the pearl, the node, the found in the garden, satisfactorily reading the content versus reading the intent and hoping for an apple. Here is a series of questions for you. What in the room surrounds you as you read? What dream did you most recently awaken from? What self were you hoping to protect? What colors stand out to you first? Did you think another might have noticed the same? In winter or in spring, in one year when plants are thriving, living really, this is what I'm fostering, a forest. A line of thread, a line of type, a line of trees, held with many other lines, surrounded by endless other lines. The pattern is the seeds fallen and planted, is haphazard tiny lives growing, is variation. Branches intertwine, interthread, interact, interweave as they mature. No longer singular, they hold to one and another. My interpretation of sound. In my interpretation of the sound, of the thread, it appears to move forward, unwavering, and forward and looking to be about to hatch, determining a number and force, tension and mouthfeel, I think to print upon a ribbon. I think to come up with a drawing to predict the action. Who are these women who move in a fog, who hold steady the edges of left and right? I think about density there, and also willpower and strength and practice and talent. One thing to note, it has been years. If I want to find a weaver, where do I? If I'm thinking about becoming an apprentice, how? I invent it. And then I've also been working on, of course, some more kind of like playful things. So one of the projects, or some of the go-to thing that I like to do if I'm not quite sure what I'm writing, but I feel like writing, is I've been working through a series of poems that I find in my spam email. So I look through my spam and I kind of see what weird things pop up in there, and then kind of go from there to see what might happen. So this poem I'm going to read is definitely came from my spam folder somehow. It's called 4 Deferred Messages Found. Good, because I noticed nobody was getting in touch. First, about bananas and their placement on the counter or the kitchen. First, about production on a home, the numbers of necessary slats, power washers, etc. First, now third, about consuming substances within the body, want pills, want foods, want drinks, or an observation of how I look in the fictionalized photo posted online. Fourth, someone I know finally, but only not them, instead of bought who borrowed an identity for an hour or two. Would like to look for something there, would like to know without a lens, and seeing close up the scrape or pulse of sound. Nervous? Never. Of course I am. And small items are going missing, some synapses slowly over time. How much longer could a person stay? How happy with so what little, for example? And why can't my little such and such succeed? That tiny such and such I send, resend daily into that world. And then these last 2 poems that I will finish with, I think are kind of coming out of our collective mental crises of like the political situation right now that I feel like just sort of weighs on all of us. And as you can tell, probably, I'm not really like an overt writer, like I'm not really like, here's the thing that I'm talking about, let me tell you exactly how I feel. But I think that these poems are the ones that for me are sort of capturing that certain type of dissatisfaction. The actions that words are. The word I had was subsistence, was subtle, was waiting for new growth. The word I had was forgotten, but it made me think how words could be better, how words, of course, are objects like the others. One word I had was shelter. It was behaving exactly counter to expectations. It was able to stand up and step right out and leave without any sighing or looking behind. Often a word was identified when other words came near, rubbing against initial language, recognizing source thought or keen gestures. A word no one wanted to think about was torment. Another, a phrase, deeply ingrained problematic behaviors. Sometimes we remember words and sometimes we lose them. One, performance, is a crisis, so I put those marks there to draw attention. One, detail, is always a little bit true. Some of the actions that words are, I wish I could attend to. Some ignore, some continue to distress about, rarely publicly. And then this will be my last poem, so you'll know when to clap. This is called A Container in the Street, as balm, as wish, as memory. Other baking of the bread, other greening in the morning, imaginary trimming of the grasses, trees. When they come together, I think maybe a victory, no, maybe a victim. Another packing up and going away, another morning leaf blower, enchanted dust in once secreted hole in the wall, view in the fence, short fuse, no, in the dryer, long wire, no, from the ceiling, and a mounting. Where once a strategy went very, very wrong. The incorrect choice, like shrapnel, but also like knowing any action is mistake. Fairly early on, I looked for yes in the darkness in the evening. Yes, I wish the code led somewhere, some new moment, otherwise lost. The box should be taped or stapled or left open. It should be held from above and labeled, be comforted beneath the house or closet. Yes, I gather my own archive, the box to put the list, the codex, know of what I want, need, would detest, fear, delight, enjoy, into.
We have
questions? Anyone have some questions? I knew you would have a question. Thank you.
I wonder about how you approach revision of poetry. I'll just leave it.
It varies, but I do revise kind of a lot. I tend to start, generally my very first draft is something that looks absolutely nothing like a poem. So I start with something that is probably nowhere near a poem, and then I sort of begin shaping it into something that will be a poem, or something that I throw away entirely, depending. But mostly my revision process has to do with reading and rereading and waiting and coming back to it and reading again and seeing what I might need to change or delete or add or remove.
How many people were at the talk? So I think most were not at the talk. Could you just explain a little bit about your sewing project? And I'm now curious how you chose which poems were going to be part of that.
Okay, so let me try to recap my talk super fast. So in my talk, some of the things that I talked about, where I was, so I sort of started jumping away from the page because I was just sort of suffering from writer's block, and I didn't find writing poetry fun anymore, and I think it should be fun. So I had started using some like book arts techniques as sort of ways to create a poem. So really thinking about the form of the paper or the size of the page, and thinking about what I could then write on it or how I could begin. So I was using the book arts as sort of like a generative technique. And then that got me really excited to think about other ways that the poem could exist not on the page, or other ways that the reader could interact with the poem, how I could maybe invite readers into a poem in a different way, how I could invite them to experience the poem, maybe visually, maybe tactily, maybe get them to do something with the poem as they're reading it. So then I came up with this project that I've been working on for quite some time because it's very time consuming. So I've been creating this series of what I'm calling woven broadsides. So basically I have a loom, because I'm weird. So I have a loom and I can sew, sort of. So I'm using like the materials that I have at my disposal. So what I started doing is I started sewing lines of poems onto separate lines of ribbon, and then I would, once I had those, I would weave them into a piece of material, so into a broadside. So they're about yay big. And so I know you asked me, how do I decide which poems to put into the broadsides? So for that project, I think because I knew that it was going to be some sort of time-consuming something, I didn't want to write necessarily new poems for it, but I was also really interested in creating this woven project and trying to create an experience for the reader that would somehow demonstrate to them the type of work or time or experience or effort that goes into writing a poem. You know, I feel like when we just look at a poem on like a printed page or an 8.5 by 11 page, you're like, oh, look, a bunch of words. That could have taken 5 minutes, you know? So it's also, I was trying to recreate in some way or somehow like justify the time and the amount of effort that goes into a poem in this woven project. And so I had these poems, these garden poems. You heard me read some of those. And one of the things that I was trying to do in those poems was to recreate the experience of the garden, of being in that garden. So sort of trying to recreate the time and the moment of it. And so I thought that those would work really nicely in terms of the woven broadside, because they are recreating a moment. And then once they're woven in to this other piece entirely, then they become something additional to that as well. So they become, I think, hopefully like a sort of more immersive experience. It's not like you're in the garden, but you're doing something and you're experiencing the poem in a different way than if I would just read it to you or if you were just reading it on the page.
Any other questions?
That poem that you went with Thunder and Wonder material, I love the sound of it, and it feels like it's with the called
I'm gonna look my answer.
Oh.
I don't know, I'd have to look at it.
Well, it just felt like, when I was reading it, there was like running through with like punctuation. And then that poem that you read about, or the same lyra piece, but a different. So I was just wondering, I guess I'm wondering what sort of like it feels like the poems don't feel like they're self-expressive. I feel like there's something else going on. I'm just curious. I guess I'm trying to lead you towards grammar, but I don't know why I'm doing that. So, just gonna backtrack and I'm trying to ask, like, what is your primary interest when you're like starting a poem? Like, what's exciting to you? Like, does it have to do more with the words, or does it have to do with images, and maybe like what's really?
I think I almost always start with a word or a piece of language. Like I almost always start with sound and word, and then beyond that, I think I might be weird in this way. Beyond that, I'm most interested in creating some sort of mood, and I also really like form. Like I really like poetic forms, but I don't really write in forms. So I also feel like frequently what I'm doing is I'm like imagining my own form, and you can hear that a lot in repetition, which is something that I enjoy a lot. So I'm like, how will I make this poem that is not necessarily cohesive cohere? So I'm thinking about other ways around that, or other ways to make a poem that is maybe, I mean it's not really, but like it's potentially, on first read, a series of like unrelated images, or a series of unrelated things. How do I invite the reader in so that they will read it again and get more out of it the second time? So definitely I'm very interested in sound, like I'm very sound oriented, and that is something that I would say drives most of my work.
Other question?
We're in the ice house. When you were starting something like an ice storm poem or like a landscape, did you start knowing which one you were going to write, or did you write something that kind of became one of those? And then kind of like a sub-question is like, how did they get ordered the way they did? Because some are next to each other, some are all mixed together. That's kind of interesting, since they're all the same title.
Right.
How did it come to be that way?
That is an excellent question. I talked about this a little bit in the class visit earlier, and the basic answer is that I don't have a really good answer for you. Like it was just sort of like a fortuitous occurrence. Like when I hit upon it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna work. But basically, I would say like maybe the basic answer is that a lot of those poems started off as pieces of something else, or maybe pieces of one long poem. I really can't remember. But when I was working on the book, and when I was thinking about trying to put together a manuscript, and thinking about how to allow the manuscript to cohere and allow the pieces to kind of resonate against each other, I found that these little sort of fragmented moments, they did that job for me. So by creating those like little visual things that flipped in and out, that was something that set the type of mood that I was working for. But you heard me read them, like the Ice Storm, like I read, actually didn't read all of the Ice Storm, but I read a lot of the Ice Storm, and so you can see how I feel like they go together. Like in some ways I feel like they are a poem, and I think once early on I did have them like all in a row. Like I had like a section that was like the Ice Storm, and a section that was the birds, but it felt super weird, like contrived and crazy. So now that they're spread out, I feel like I can kind of get away with them a little bit more. So it's not like 13 ways of looking at a blackbird, but it's like, here's a landscape, and here's another landscape, and here's, in fact, another landscape.
Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between your MFA thesis and what became your book, and whether there are poems that made their way from your thesis into some of these other publications?
Great, that is a good question. So for my MFA, I finished my MFA in 2003, and the book came to being, I won the contest in 2009, and then there was a little more editing, and then I published it in 2011. So it's kind of a long time between my thesis and this book. I think that there is very little overlap. There might be 2 or 3 poems that I wrote while I was working on my MFA that made it in here. There might also be, I need to go check the basement of the University of Iowa libraries and see if like maybe some of these little Ice Storm snippets were in there somewhere. I'm not really sure. But I feel like the bulk of the poems in here, the bulk of the writing in here was done after I had completed my MFA. So in like the 2 to 3 years after I'd completed it, and then I spent a lot of time revising and thinking about how to make it some sort of like coherent book. So like that took another couple of years. And it's a process. It's a very long process. It's a good one. It's a good one.
So for beginning writers, at the beginning of this long process, what tidbit or 2 of advice would you give?
I asked a version of this question earlier. You can give the same answer if you want.
I don't even remember what I said last time. But I think, I mean, in terms of thinking about maybe creating a body of work or thinking about what your body of work might look like, one of the things that I really enjoy doing, because I am sort of like a visual tactile person, is I do a lot of like printing things out and printing out multiple copies and multiple drafts and leaving them kind of around the house so that I encounter them at different times. And I do a lot of like physical reordering and rereading, and I feel like that is really helpful in eventually getting to the place where I become a reader of my poems instead of the writer of my poems. I feel like that's sort of the hardest thing, is to get that distance. And so frequently, like printing them out, removing them from my computer, maybe removing them from my office. Those are ways that allow me to encounter things just a little bit differently and give me kind of like a set of fresh eyes.
All right, well, thank you, Genevieve Kaplan.